Man, we cannot be more excited to talk a little Raiders football with friend of the program, Tampa Bay Trey, who, by the way, is one of my favorite Twitter handles in all the land. Trevor Sikkema from PFF. Trevor, it's good to see you, brother. And let's begin here. Raiders are on the clock at 13 on, about a week ago now. And I'm sitting there, and we get the news that it's Brock Bowers. Initial thought was, okay. I didn't see that mocked anywhere. What were you thinking when the Raiders were on the clock at 13 there?
Basically the exact same thing, right? When I saw Bowers as the pick for the Raiders, again, that's kind of the only reaction that you could have because there's so many different thoughts that are going around your head, right? We talked about, are the Raiders going to be aggressive for a quarterback? Okay, well, if it's not a quarterback, are they going to trade back from 13? If they don't do that, offensive line or corner. And then all of a sudden, Brock Bowers sitting in their lap because 6 quarterbacks went in the 12 picks that were before them. And when they drafted him, I was like, wait a second, they have Michael Mayer. What are they doing? And then I thought more about the roster and how they just really need better, football players, pass catchers, offensive weapons in general. And I go, all right, they got my number 7 overall player at number 13. I can't be that mad about it, especially because of all the flexibility that I think he gives you. And so, when I think about the combination more and more, Mayer can be that on the line of scrimmage presence for you as a tight end who also gives you that plus receiving ability. But then Bowers can really give you a ton of fits if he's also attached to the line of scrimmage in 12 personnel. If you have him in the slot as well, you force defenses to cover 2 massive tight end receivers. And so, look, the more I thought about it, I didn't expect it, but I don't hate it for the Raiders, who, in my opinion, played the draft the right way and simply capitalized on a really good football player, one that was basically consensus top 10 everywhere you looked, at number 13 outside of the top 10.
It was funny because we were talking a lot and obviously on Friday and through the weekend about Brock and kind of the philosophy that Tom Telesco showed us during draft weekend. And I say, it's funny because I mean this, obviously with all due respect, but it feels like Raiders fans aren't used to a regime just going and getting the best guy that's on the board, right? Regardless of position. It wasn't a reach. It wasn't like, oh boy, what are the Raiders thinking here? Tom Telesco just said, hey, this is the best dude out there and we're going to add him to our roster. So when you zoom in on what Brock Bowers does, and obviously as a guy who watches a lot of college football, I was very familiar with what he brings to the table. But when you look at him just in terms of a prospect, Trevor, what are the Raiders getting in young Mr. Bowers from Napa, California?
Yeah, so, the tight end label with Bowers, it feels a little bit deceiving because even though pound for pound, I think this guy is strong. If you had him in 12 personnel and you had him attached to the line of scrimmage, I think you could get by. He's not the kind of tight end that you hear people talk about where they go, oh, it's like an extra offensive lineman is out there, right? I mean, you're not going to want Bowers to sit alone on the line of scrimmage attached next to the tackle, and you're having the offensive line shift to the left, and all of a sudden Bowers has to single block a 5 technique defensive end at the NFL level. You're not really going to want him to do that very often. So you have to get a little bit more creative with how you see his usage, and you got to watch what Georgia was able to do with him. They had him on the line of scrimmage quite a bit, but to me at the NFL level, what he did best at Georgia and the true return on investment for drafting him at number 13 is a yards after catch type of a guy. Whether that is off of play action, he's attached to the line of scrimmage, or, having him as a wing back, a step behind the line of scrimmage, having him do split zone concepts and flows where he's going against the grain, where the offensive line might be all shifting to the right and he's crossing behind the line of scrimmage to the left. All of a sudden, now the defense is flowing one way, he's flowing the other. That puts him in really advantageous yards after catch situations, in my opinion. And then, of course, what he can do in the slot as well. If a team has a preferred slot defender, and this is more of a smaller cornerback, all of a sudden Bowers becomes a mismatch option for you all game long that week. So to me, that's where you're really getting the value from him. When I was talking about Brock as a prospect, some people were like, well, I think he's, a top 3 prospect in this class. And I think he's super talented, but I just tried to remind people before we even got to the combine, Georgia's got this guy listed at 6'4", 240 pounds. And we know that schools like to fabricate a little bit like a Tinder profile, give you a little bit extra height, give you a little bit of extra weight there. And so it was more of a reality that he was probably a little bit smaller than what Georgia had him listed at. Well, that's pretty low percentile for a tight end, a true tight end. But when you expand that to say, no, 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 he's not just this traditional tight end. He is more of that wide receiver weapon for you. That's when you can really start to picture some of what I talked about in these different ways to get him the ball, yet allow him to be sort of a disguised tight end a little bit by position or by name alone. So Bowers is somebody who gives you a lot of creativity in what you want to do with your offense.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because the example that we used all throughout draft weekend was, you kind of look at the way that the NBA is right now, where it's like positionless basketball. You just get 5 dudes out there that can play together and say, hey, you're the best 5 guys out there, go do your thing. And it kind of feels like Bowers kind of fits in that mold a little bit. Like, for your point, like, yes, we'll list him as a tight end because you got to list him as something, but he's a dude who can be in the slot, who can line up in the backfield, who brings a lot of versatility. And it kind of feels like that's what the way that, some of these top end tight ends really are going these days, right?
No, and I think that that's a really good way to put it, where basketball, it used to be so much more structured. Like, okay, well, the point guard is the speedy ball handler, and the shooting guard's the guy that's actually going to get up the most shots. A small forward can kind of be a jack of all trades for you. But then, all right, power forward, maybe you're stretching him out a little bit, but he's attacking the glass. Center is just this big mauling dude in the middle who's going to get rebounds for you. Now we see in the NBA, you could have all of those adjectives and descriptions for basically every single player that's on the court. And you're, like you say, you're just trying to get your best 5, or in football, your best 11 out there. And I think that this is a little bit more towards that direction of how they're going to utilize Brock Bowers. And I hope that they are as open-minded as possible, because I really do feel as though he could put a ton of stress on a defense just in his presence of where you line him up if you allow yourself to kind of think outside the box offensively.
I think we've all been pleasantly surprised a little bit by just how, after the initial shock, I think is fair to say, it feels like the fan base really has been kind of open-minded and like, all right, let's zoom out a little bit. Let's see what this guy's going to bring. And at the end of the day, he brings another exciting element to an offense that has, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Zamir coming into his own now a little bit. So it will be exciting to see what he does. But we always like to say everyone gives so much love and so much props to the first-round guy for obvious reasons, but he is not the only member of the Raiders draft class in 2024. Going down to the second round there, Tampa Bay, Trey, a guy that, spoiler alert, I love as an Oregon alum, Jackson Powers Johnson, who you guys had as one of your biggest round 2 steals. What do we like from the young man from the University of Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, I think he could start at center or guard. I really do. I'm pretty surprised that he lasted until the second round. This is one of the best values of the draft for me. And I mean, he was completely dominant this past year while he was playing in Oregon. He was dominant at the Senior Bowl, both at guard and center. There's reports of like, okay, maybe he's still dealing with some lingering injuries going into his rookie season, but man, that should not have been a reason, in my opinion, for him to be a second round pick. Now, you could say, all right, there was just so many offensive linemen in this class. Naturally, he gets pushed down a little bit, but man, that is to the Raiders' advantage, because I really do feel as though you have a potential starter for the long term, either at center or at guard. He has both the athleticism and the strength. And I'll throw on there the mentality. I think the way that he approaches the position to allow you to play multiple different running schemes. If you want to be more of a man blocking gap scheme type of a running team in between the tackles, I think that he has the frame and the strength to be able to move people. If you want to be more of a zone blocking team, I think he's got the athleticism and he's fleet of foot to get it to the outside and even be a puller in that regard too. So to me, Powers Johnson was somebody who in normal draft classes could have been gone 20 picks before when he was selected. Like, I think this guy could have been picked in the 20s in the first round, and they end up getting him at number 44. So it's one of the best steals in the draft, in my opinion.
And we were talking about obviously the versatility that Brock's going to bring to the offense, but I was thinking about this the other day, Trevor, where it's like, you look at, and the Raiders in particular, you look at a guy like Dylan Parham who can play all those interior positions on the line. Obviously, Andre James has position versatility. Jackson Powers Johnson, a dude who has position versatility specifically on the inside. DJ Glaze, another guy that they selected. It feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that having that versatility along the offensive line is newish, right? Like, I don't remember as a kid being like, oh man, this guy can play, left guard, center, right guard. It feels like that's kind of the new en vogue way to attack an offensive line a little bit.
It is going back to the conversation that we were having a few minutes ago of like, it's not quite positionless the way it might be for offensive playmakers, but there is a lot more versatility with these guys. And I think it's just a lot of like cross training that gets
Mm-hmm.
done, I think, throughout the years of high school and college football. Like sometimes these guys go to lower level competitions and they play offensive tackle. And I mean, you could even go back into the first round of this draft, right? Graham Barton, he's a 2-year starter at left tackle for the Duke Blue Devils. And then he gets drafted by the Buccaneers, and they're like, yeah, I mean, this guy's a center through and through. So they're going to draft him and they're going to put him at center. And so you just have a lot of that position versatility with a lot of what's going on. Now, I will say this too, with the emergence or I guess that's probably the best way to say it, of zone blocking schemes, it's more popular today than it has ever been in the NFL. Or I should just say like through football in general. And when you run a lot more zone blocking schemes, especially when it's like mid and outside zone, these offensive linemen got to be able to move.
Yeah, big fella's got to get out there.
Sit here and say to yourself, right. So you can't just sit here and say like, oh, let's draft a 330-pound guard who can't move, like who's just going to go north to south for 2 yards and try to like move somebody and push the pocket a little bit. You have to have these players, because there's a lot of teams where you can look at it and you can say to yourself, oh, well, they're a zone blocking team. Yeah, okay, they might run zone. A zone blocking team, if you will, is still only running zone like 60 to maybe 70% of the time. I mean, there's still another 30-40% of your run plays that are going to be those traditional duo man gap concepts. So you've got to be able to do both. And just the fact that you have to be an athlete enough to do zone blocking assignments, I think, to me, just naturally over the course of coming through high school football, college football to the NFL, you are not only cross-trained position-wise, but you have to be good enough of an athlete to do these things, because space and speed kills in this era of football. And so to me, I think that's why you're seeing more of these tackles become guards, and even guards potentially becoming tackles, just because they are more athletic today than they used to be.
Yeah, and I think in just a very plain, boring numbers way, right? Like you only can dress so many guys on game day, right? Like you need to be able to have that versatility in the emergency break glass situation. Like, hey, our swing tackle in an absolute pinch, if it's the fourth quarter and we got to go 80 yards, can we kick him inside? Like you need to, all these coaches need to have those conversations, to be able to have that kind of thought process as they go into dressing those 46 guys on a game day. But Trevor, one guy that, going through the Raiders draft class that I'm very intrigued by, right? I don't know if he's going to be a great pro. I certainly hope he is. But one guy that there's something about him that I like is our man Dylan Lobby from New Hampshire, the running back, a guy who can do a ton of stuff on special teams, which is obviously the key to my heart. But where do you think, and he kind of talks about this in his opening press conference, where do you think the value is now for guys like that, considering the new kickoff rules that we're going to see in 2024?
Yeah, I think kickoff rules is obviously a big part of why you saw some players maybe drafted a little bit higher than they would have normally been, because teams don't know exactly what's going to work within those new kickoff rules. But to me, it's more catered towards running backs and vision than it is necessarily like having great long speed, with the contact point, and I should just say the start point of where the kick coverage and the kick return team are lined up. Like it's much more of a run play. It's much more of, okay, like, let me see which blocker has the correct leverage and wall this guy off. And it's so much more about ball carrier vision than it is about just total athleticism. So just as a player out of the backfield, naturally, Lobby has that experience to him. But also just that shiftiness, man, that one cut ability. I think that those things are very advantageous when you're making a difference as a special teams player. So I think that Lobby he's not going to be like a bell cow back in this league, I don't think. I guess like Austin Eckler is his ceiling, right, is what he does as a receiving back. But I see him much more of as a third down rotational running back who, we know what he could do as a receiver. I mean, he had over 200 yards receiving in one game this past year, which is nuts. But then also you're hoping that he gives you that plus return ability as well as a kick returner that the league's basically just going to trial by fire. Like let's find out who is the best at kick return. And I think you're going to see a lot of different guys coming in and off of the roster because of that.
I love the element of like, let's see what sticks. Who knows? Let's see what sticks.
Right,
It'll
right.
change. And I think what's one of the kind of underrated storylines that we'll see throughout the regular season is how the approach, not only at the Raiders, but across the league changes from week 1 through week 18 and how different it is and how different teams attack it. And it'll be a blast to kind of see the game within the game week to week across the league. But, Trevor, we talked about a lot of guys that the Raiders have added to the roster, and we kind of talked about it, briefly. But one area they did not address, at least in the draft, they added an undrafted free agent, was at quarterback. So all indications at this point would suggest that we're going to see a Minshew versus AOC battle throughout the offseason and into training camp. When you look at the weapons that are on this team, when you look at the offensive line, a defense that we think it was good last year is going to get even better, realistic expectations for that quarterback battle as we go through the summer here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be fun, right? I mean, like I still think that Aiden O'Connell has some left in the tank. I mean, we are in such an age of football where it's just like you watch a handful of games of a guy who's young and starting for the first time, you just go like, yep, that's who he's going to be forever.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, it's so harsh the way that we judge people. So I really liked Aiden O'Connell his first year as a starter when he was at Purdue. I mean, he had a near elite PFF passing grade when he was there. Really liked the fearlessness that he brought to the table. That year afterwards wasn't as good. And obviously he's had some up and down moments as a pro, but he has had some of those moments where you go like, okay, there's something here at least worth taking into battle with when it comes to a training camp battle against an experienced veteran like Minshew. So I don't know what the ceiling of these guys is. Obviously, there's a lot of new that's going on in this team anyways, a lot of new chemistry along the offensive line, some new receiver additions, obviously how you're throwing Brock Bowers into this. And I think that just the quarterback that has the best chemistry with the offensive playmakers is going to be the one who gets this job, because I feel as though the talent level is similar between these two guys. Obviously, the experience nods to Minshew, but maybe you'd want to invest more in AOC because he's a younger quarterback that if it hits, okay, maybe you got something here for the long term. So it should be a truly even playing field with, hey, let the best quarterback win. And to me, it's just a matter of whoever comes out with the best chemistry throughout minicamp and training camp.
And I apologize because I'm not going to remember who tweeted this out, but someone brought up a great point that they said, look, Aiden O'Connell, if this dude was a first-round pick, if he was a second-round pick a year ago, the conversation, the narrative around him would be so much different. You'd be like, oh man, nice little ending of the season. Can't wait to see what jump he makes in year 2. So It is interesting that how we have to kind of frame all these guys in a certain type of way. And your point, man, like, 8 games into a rookie, you're like, hey, this is what he is. This is who he's going to be for the next decade in the NFL. And so I encourage all of us, myself included sometimes, just to zoom out a little bit, take a deep breath and say, hey, let's let the young kid cook for a little bit and see what happens come week 1.
No, I'm with you, man. I think that that's the right approach. And like having a full off season is also really important, especially after you have started a handful of games, right? Because then you have legitimate tape to watch and self-scout with, your coaches on the team, your quarterback's coaches in the offseason, like all of that. And you have an ability to say like, okay, this is what I naturally did last year. Here's how I can get better. So that's another reason why I'm excited about this, because I think that from everybody that I have talked to that either knows Aiden really well or has coached him, he seems like somebody who picks things up really quickly, has a really great work ethic, and just wants to try to maximize all the talent that he has. And when you have those things in place, well, now you got somebody who's worth giving a shot to. So I am excited to see how this plays out for them later this summer.
Yeah, and one thing is for sure, it will not be boring. There will be plenty of things to discuss, no shortage of storylines to follow, and it'll be a lot of fun. But hey, man, before we let you out of here, just major shout out to you and the PFF guys. The draft coverage was awesome. I know you guys, it's in many ways your Super Bowl, so you guys crushed it. Just an absolutely dominant effort. We go back to the numbers all the time. We use you guys as a reference for a bunch of things. So congrats on that. But what do you guys got cooking now? Hopefully a little question mark downtime for the next couple days.
A little bit, but look, man, I'm going to be getting into summer scouting for next year's class coming in about a month. So look, at the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, myself, Connor Rogers, my co-host, we take a little bit of time to kind of, decompress a little bit after we get the draft grades episode out, which is out now. You guys can go check that out if you want. We talk about all 32 NFL teams, all the 257 prospects that were drafted. We go through all that good stuff. But hey, man, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be turning the page. And if you are a college football fan, or you're just an NFL draft fan, or you just want to kind of look ahead a little bit, we'll start to get into those guys that are draft eligible for next year, talk about some expectations for them this coming year. And the summer episodes, more relaxed, a lot more fun, some wackiness to it. I mean, like it's always a good switching of the vibe when we get to the summertime. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, man, as I said, like you guys do such an awesome job. It's so much fun to get to work with you and Dave and the rest of the crew over there at PFF. So whenever you want to talk ball, you let us know and we'll have you on. Well, dude, it was so good to see you again. Like I said, enjoy at least a few days of rest and relaxation. I'm sure we'll bug you again this offseason, all right?
Appreciate it, brother. You do the same.